And thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. My name is S. Famajere, and I'm the program manager over at Graham & Walker. Very excited to have you here for our roundtable with our amazing partners over at Vanta. And so just a few kind of like logistics and house rules. Feel free to utilize the chat as much as possible. Comments and questions are welcomed in the chat, and we will be looking throughout. So if our speakers even spot anything as well, they may be able to address it. But feel free to engage with each other and with our speakers via the chat. We will have time for a live Q&A as well at the end. So don't worry, your question will be attended to. And we are pretty on point with timing, so we should be able to get to everything as well. But I'm going to introduce our speakers while we are at it. And so we are joined today by Christina Cacioppo. Did I say that right? Yay. And she is the CEO of Vanta. And a little bit about her. After starting her career in early stage VC at Union Square Ventures, Christina went on to lead product management for a Dropbox paper, bringing the product to market. At Dropbox, Christina experienced firsthand the challenges and trade-offs many teams face when trying to scale adoption of a SaaS product without first having security certifications in place. The Y Combinator alum is now the co-founder and CEO of Vanta, a leading security and compliance platform backed by Sequoia Capital, where she is pioneering a continuous automated approach to security monitoring. So you're in good hands. And today she'll be joined by Claire Schmidt, who is the CEO and founder of AllVoices. Claire is the founder and CEO, an employee feedback management platform that enables employees to report issues and share feedback directly with leadership. Before founding AllVoices, Claire served as Vice President of Technology and Innovation at 20th Century Fox. She started her career in strategy consulting and has held leadership roles in nonprofits, startups, and large corporations. So you all are in good hands today. We're very excited to have Christina and Claire with us. And with that being said, I'm going to hand things off to you all.
Thank you so much. Wonderful introduction, and so glad to be with y'all today. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully y'all can see this okay. The llama's great. Okay, so really excited to talk with y'all and honestly talk to Claire a little, mostly about her journey and her company's journey around establishing trust, especially with some of the early customers and buyers. So with that, just a bit of an overview to kick things off. We'll talk through how Vanta and AllVoices kind of came to be through like each of our founding stories here, and why we were solving this problem, or the problems that we're each solving. Why trust is so important in modern businesses and B2B software in particular, and how to establish that trust from the onset and then maintain it with your customers over time. And then specifically diving into SOC 2 compliance and a handful of lessons learned, and how Claire kind of thinks about it as she's gone through this process with her company. So with that, the intros were amazing. I don't want to add that much. I think I just kind of, for me, a bit of the founding story on Vanta, and then I'll pass it off to you, Claire. But sort of touched on this, but I did not come from a security and compliance background. I was just like a software builder, product manager, working at Dropbox, trying to take a new product to market. It's Dropbox Paper, their sort of document editor, Google Docs equivalent, if you're familiar with it. We were a small team working on it, but we were like convinced we were going to be bigger than Dropbox as soon as we launched. And sort of step one in our world domination plan was to give Paper away to all the Dropbox users. So it seems like a good way to get bigger than Dropbox, to start as big as Dropbox. And so that was our plan, and basically until the 11th hour when the legal team politely but firmly came by and told us we couldn't do that because we were not meeting Dropbox's security or compliance bars. And this all happened in 2015, so sort of the height of Dropbox's power. And it was like, look, this company that seems to be like the pinnacle of San Francisco startups has to pause for a year and a half and go through this onerous process in order to bring something new to market. Like, this seems not ideal, to put it lightly. So that was my first exposure to this world. And here we are kind of 5-6 years later with Vanta. Claire, what about you? What's your founding story here?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this chat. Security is something I think about all the time. So I think it's going to be great. The founding story of All Voices, I had a similar sort of aha moment to you, Christina, but it was when I was working at 20th Century Fox and I read Susan Fowler's blog post about her experience with harassment at Uber. And I had this moment of thinking, like, what she had to experience is so backwards and yet so common. And this cannot be the way forever, right? There has to be a better solution. There has to be an alternative for employees who experience something like harassment or really anything in the workplace and want to speak up about it, but don't know how or don't feel comfortable or don't know who to talk to, or like in Susan's case, are afraid that they might experience retaliation, which she did. So I started doing a ton of research, talked to probably hundreds of people over the course of spring and summer 2017, and finally landed on All Voices as a solution to this problem. And it's basically an employee feedback tool and reporting tool for serious issues and smaller scale issues that opens up a two-way communication between the employee and leadership and gives them an opportunity to resolve that issue. And also gives company leaders actual data on what's happening across their employee base because this feedback is so transparent and honest. So that's who we are and that's what we do.
Great, thank you. And I like distinctly remember, was it the Saturday or Sunday that blog post came out, and I was gone all day, and I came back and like saw it all over Twitter. And I just remember sitting in my apartment, like in the dark, kind of reading, like glued to my phone.
Yes, I read it like late at night, and I read it twice because I was like, what? So yeah, it was compelling for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Well, great. Well, thank you for that. I think we're starting off with, just as we think about security, like 5 rules of thumb to keep in mind here, especially as you're kind of starting up. And so we'll go through these and then like really double click on number 5. But 5 rules of thumb that we've put together at Vanta based on the 2,000 customers we've worked with over the last couple of years of just, good things to keep in mind early. First is start early, even if you don't do things perfectly. I think often with a lot of, say kind of security and compliance, right? It sounds like, oh, that's probably really heavy and I have to do everything really well. And, 90% isn't good enough. I have to get to, 99%. And you can just like, to the extent you think that, like break that mental model. Starting early has a lot of benefits. And, starting early at 25% is actually much better than kind of sticking at 0. Second piece of advice is codify as much as you can, often in code. So this is sort of where possible, if you can enforce things through code or automation or just use tooling, whether it's off-the-shelf tools or things you build internally with code or with no code tools, whatever it is, to just help double check, because there's a lot of moving pieces, and it's really helpful to have something running in the background and sort of telling you, hey, you said you wanted 2-factor on everybody's email, but you don't have it, and getting those alerts versus having to go be proactive and check all that stuff yourself. Y'all are founders, probably have a million other things to do at any given point in time. Third piece is, like, if you're going to do sort of one thing or one-ish thing, try to keep track of your people and your things. So people generally means employees. Who has access to what? How do they have that access? What tools should they have access to? And then things, laptops, cloud infrastructure, AWS items. Honestly, even just having lists of those and sort of knowing, what databases you have, what databases are in staging, that sort of thing can be really helpful. We've noticed that just kind of, again, having these lists and sort of the act of having these lists and the act of putting these lists together can actually be quite helpful. So it's more about the process of putting this stuff together than the end artifact. Fourth tip, centralize and assign. So once you do have those lists in central places, it gets a lot easier to be like, hey, here's a set of, employee laptops. Like, I'm going to be responsible for these. I'm going to make sure this is always up to date. Here's a set of cloud infrastructure. Like, Claire, hey, can you be responsible for these, right? And so once you have these lists, working through and assigning ownership over pieces of it. And we'll talk more about this. I know it's a little high level, but for now. And then the fifth piece is, once you feel like you sort of have this baseline reasonable level of security to talk about with your buyers, really encourage you to think about demonstrating that to them with a SOC 2. So I think this is all, SOC 2 is sort of nothing more or less than a currency for enterprise sales in some way. And so it's about having a third party come in, checking out your practices, writing that up in a formal way. And then you have this document and artifact you can share with all of your buyers. And they really understand the SOC 2. It's sort of conceptually like the common application from college applications. If any of you remember that, I went through it, right? Like fill this thing out once, send it to multiple people. They understand the format. You can go from there. And so we're gonna go through SOC 2, and I'll ask Claire a lot of questions about how she and AllVoices thought about going through the process, when they did, why they started when they did, and ultimately like kind of how they went through it, and would they, recommend this to other startups, and if it does in fact establish the trust that, we all hope it did, or hope to build with our software buyers. So with that, I'm going to stop screen sharing actually, because it's more engaging to look at us, and then flip over to Claire. And I mean, maybe just to start really high level, security means a lot of things to a lot of people. What does it mean to you and AllVoices?
Yeah. Security, as I mentioned before, is like the number one priority for our company. So we may have gone through this process a bit earlier than other companies, but in part that's because it is really critical for our business's success. So when we launched the product, we actually already had signed customers, because we were launching in this moment of like the Me Too movement, and everyone was like scrambling, trying to figure out like, how do we address this issue in our workplace? How do we hear from employees and make them feel safe? So we were thinking about security even from day one, like, how do we keep their data safe? How do we make sure we're not exposing their data to any like risks, that we have like a really reduced risk of a breach? And all of that was really important to us from day one. And it also played a role in our product development. So as we are building upon this kind of foundation of the product, what new features might we want? And we had to look at that through a security lens. Is this feature going to introduce new risk to our customers, to their employees, to us as a company? And so things like Google Analytics, which is pretty standard for most companies, we chose to disable because we did not want Google to have sensitive data about employees or our customers. So it's pretty much fundamental to everything we do, and it's informed the way we've built our team, the way we've built our product, the relationships we have with our customers.
The Google example is sort of fascinating. I'm curious of other ways, like how is it, you mentioned informing how you built your team, like what are some of the decisions you all made that others might not?
Well, so for the first year of our company, and this is probably not best practice, I'm not saying I would recommend it. I sort of paid for it later, and I can tell you more about that. But for the first year, it was just me and a bunch of engineers. And so we didn't have to start to think about sales as much, or we didn't have other people in the company pushing hard and saying like, hey, we really need the Google Analytics data because it's going to help us in sales in these following ways. So because we didn't have to, I mean, I was thinking about sales, but I was the only one. And I also had like the security mindset. And so we were able to build like an incredibly secure product, enterprise grade product from day one, because we dedicated all of our resources and all of our time and all of our energy to product.
Neat. And you mentioned trade-offs on that. Like, it sounds great to me as a former product manager, like that head on. Like, what would you recommend that for other founders?
Well, the problem with that is, so I raised a pre-seed round in late 2017. I raised $1 million, which at once sounds like a lot of money, but also when you're dealing with building software is not. So when I got to, sort of the end of that money and I started thinking about like, okay, I have to go fundraise again, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm kind of on the hook for all these sales metrics that I haven't even been thinking of because I've been so focused on building like the perfect product. And so it was a tougher fundraise than I thought. And I think I let my initial fundraising experience kind of color what I thought the next one would be like, which the first one was very fast. I was raising just on this idea and I was able to just sell my vision and I didn't have to share any metrics, right? Because I didn't have it. But by the time I got to my seed round, they were like, okay, well, what's your revenue and what's your revenue growth and what's your ACV and just all of these things that I hadn't been optimizing for.
It's funny. We had a similar experience, but I like didn't kind of go out for the second round. Basically, ours was like went through YC, easy, relatively fundraise. We're like, cool, we'll just like stop sales, we'll recruit engineers, like everything is great. And then I unfortunately, but like had a YC partner sort of pull me in and be like, you are off track, right? Like your batchmates are raising, your like revenue is not where it needs to be. Like we can tell this story about how you're building so much, but like get on it. It was very helpful. Anyway.
Yeah. Sometimes you need a reality check. So
yeah,
my seed fundraise was mine.
Yeah. Well, neat. Okay. So it sounds like you're thinking about security and compliance from sort of day zero, day one. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Yes. Because also remember in this moment, there was this heightened awareness around like which companies are getting called out and who's on the front page of the New York Times this week. And so I was so worried about, and it's funny because we were such a small fish. We had like a few customers, but I was so like over worried about something like a data breach or like a team of hackers trying to get our customers' information to expose them on the front page of the newspaper, right? And so I built a lot slower and I built a lot more carefully than I might have in a different climate.
And did you get that pressure or push from your customers as well? Like, where were they on this?
No, they were definitely concerned, but they felt because we had done so much upfront work, they felt very comfortable with where we were. And we built the product using like best in class security practices. So like all the encryption that we were doing, and we can go into more of the technical details, but they felt pretty comfortable with where we were. And then for me, it was just about like maintaining and building upon that.
Got it. Okay. So maybe play back to you because I have to think it's different than a lot of founders actually get a lot of these questions early, but like you didn't, but you didn't because you sort of pre-objection handled them, or you came to them and were like, here's all the things we've done. Here's all the best practices we've deployed. Do you have any other concerns? And they're like, sounds like you got it. Right.
Yeah. And we did security reviews with each of them, which are, time consuming processes, but unveil ultimately like how secure your are. Yeah.
So it sounds like you're very familiar with security reviews. I don't know about other folks on the call. Like how would you describe security review?
Well, they were surprised to me. But yes, I'm now very familiar. I'm sort of like a self-taught security expert, which I'm so far from expert, but I understand it much more than I did before. But basically, when a company is going to be working with a new vendor, like in the SaaS space, oftentimes they have to run them through some kind of security review to understand their security practices. And I know we're going to talk more about this, but a SOC 2 can kind of be a shortcut to getting around some of the questions. Because if you have a SOC 2, you have sort of a stamp of approval from this external body that's saying like, don't worry, it's, safe. They're doing things the right way. But at the time I didn't have that. And so in many cases, I was answering hundreds of questions about our security practices, about every aspect of the product, the data, who has access to the data, what does the data look like, where does it live? Is it logically separated from other customers' data? Is it encrypted? What is it encrypted with? And so on. And every company's unfortunately is slightly different. I think there's a couple tools out there that are trying to start to standardize this, but there's a few different tools. And so, so they're never going to be completely uniform. So it ultimately takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. And it's a big part of my job still.
Yeah. And you sort of mentioned this, but kind of going towards SOC 2, I mean, you're going through these security reviews. They sound like they were time consuming, obviously getting reps and getting better, I'm sure, but how did you decide on SOC 2?
Yeah, I evaluated everything that was out there. I also thought about, and I did a lot of like research on my own. I also thought about all the conversations I had at that point with customers. And by that time, there were many who had asked about, external certifications. And SOC 2 was one of the ones that came up the most frequently. Then I tried to understand the difference between like SOC 2 type 1 and SOC 2 type 2, which is, the naming is a little confusing. But realize the value of the SOC 2 type 2 as kind of like an ongoing certification and auditing process. And so to me, that made the most sense.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds like, playing back to you again, it's like had the customer conversations, heard the words, went out and understood what they were, and then kind of matched that with your own sense of like AllVoices business needs, came up and was like, okay, SOC 2 type 2. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Yeah.
Great. Okay. And again, I don't know familiarity level. If explain it to me like I'm 5. What's a SOC 2 type 2?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Maybe you should explain it. This is embarrassing. So SOC 2 type 2 is basically, so type 1 measures like your compliance at a point in time, but it's just at that point in time. So there's no promise that you don't change your practices 2 days later and, throw everything out the window that you did with your SOC 2 type 1. So SOC 2 type 2 is kind of a commitment to these ongoing practices and then getting recertified every year.
It's a great explanation.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'd love to kind of like dive in on the type 2 piece, right? So the like ongoing commitment, the continuous monitoring, like why? I mean, I can kind of imagine the benefits, especially your customers, but I also imagine it's more work for you all internally. How did you kind of think about those, or why go for something continuous?
Yeah, it is more work for us, and like it was also more expensive. And so I did have to like think about this because I've now raised our Series A, which is great, but this was before that. So basically my understanding of what our customers were looking for was like, they want us to always have their data security like top of mind, and they always want us to be keeping their data secure. And if something changes, they want to know about it. And to me, sending them something that said, well, 6 months ago, we had this all figured out and we did this the right way, it wasn't enough. And so I felt like we needed something. And this is when I came across Vanta, was like something that would help me do the work that we needed to do to monitor all of these practices in a continuous manner. And then we needed the external certification to communicate that, to validate that, and then to communicate that back out to our customers. So that's why continuous matters, because I don't think, and maybe it does work for some people, but given like we have this like always on listening tool for employees, they can use it at any time of day or night, anytime during the customer's contract with us. We need security to be underlying all of those interactions.
Neat. Okay, so you decide, because you decide to go SOC 2, you decide to do type 2, this like continuous, always on way that sort of sounds like mirrors your own product and how you think about things. So now you got that done. Great. So what happened next? Like, what decisions did you make? What tools, etc. How'd you go about executing on that?
So someone that I had met had recommended Vanta, and so I think in our case we actually talked to Vanta first about wanting to get a SOC 2 type 2 and got kind of all the information about what it would require and who the parties were that needed to be involved from our team. And and got a recommendation for an auditor. So we had a list of a few different auditors that different people had told us about, but one of those was recommended by the Vanta team. So then we went out and started talking to the auditor as well. And I had to make sure, I knew this was mostly going to fall on me the same way that security reviews do. So I just had to make sure to kind of clear out some bandwidth so that I could really dedicate a ton of time and energy to the process.
Great. And how much, I mean, rough guess, but like that time and energy, especially the first time around, ballpark?
I don't know. I mean, I have spent hundreds and hundreds of hours on either security reviews or like the SOC 2 process in total, but I can't say exactly how much time I spent on kind of like getting the audit. I guess it was like we had a kickoff call with the auditor. We also like set up Vanta. I had to create all these policies, which was great because we didn't have a lot of them. We had a few. And I had to, get all my employees to put Vanta on their computers. And then I got the, I don't know exactly what they call it, but like a spreadsheet of all the requirements from our auditor. Some of them were tied to like aspects of Vanta's product. Some of them were totally separate. And so I had to kind of go through and figure out what is Vanta tracking for me? What do I need to be tracking? Like, and then starting to actually track those things and work with our engineering team to make sure we were doing things the right way before we started the audit period, during which all of that was kind of fair game and proof of compliance with those things could be asked about. Right.
Sorry, I was like oofing slightly because I guess the early in our product, the dual spreadsheet Vanta thing makes me, sad as a product person and founder. We've tried to address that, but I'm sorry you had to go through that personally. Okay, great. And you also mentioned clearing off your schedule for this, hashtag founder schedule. Like, any tips and tricks for that? Like, how did you pull that off?
I had to sort of assess like what I was spending the majority of my time on, which I really recommend founders do anyway, because it's so easy to get into like things that are urgent, not important, or, the 2x2, or just things that like you've always done, but don't need to do anymore. So it's really, I think we're speaking about auditing, like audit your schedule every once in a while and make sure that you're only working on the things that either only you can do or that are like incredibly important. And one thing I realized was I was like still so involved in sales, because I always had been. Like I said, I didn't have a sales team. I didn't hire somebody for the first year. And then I hired my first person, and then it was the two of us in sales for the next year. And so it was like a very slow build of our sales team. So we hired a couple of account executives, and I was able to pull myself out of sales without any negative impact. Like, in fact, the team did great during that time period. So that was one of the things that I had to do to make time for this.
And now, having gone through it, is it at the point where you maybe have handed it off, feel like you could, or how do you think about the time going forward for something like this?
So I've hired an engineering leader who has some security expertise, which has been fantastic. And that person is now working on this with me, and we're sort of like tag teaming. And so we'll get like a Vanta alert, and I'm like, hey, do you want to handle this, or do you want me to? He, I would say, does more of the like obviously technical stuff. And I, like, for example, I just redid all of our policies last week. So there's still things that are on my plate, but it's a lot more, once you have someone who can like really take some of that work and kind of own it, like, even some of the smaller tasks to stay in compliance, it takes a lot of pressure off of you as the founder.
Got it. That makes sense. And the policy work, I mean, I imagine that's maybe some document editing, but it's really just like, what do you want the policies to be for the organization? Like, when somebody identifies a security bug, what is your commitment and how soon you all will fix it? Like kind of actually like founder CEO level decisions for things like that at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately I have to make these decisions because I'm like telling our team what we need to commit to. And then obviously like my team can tell me, hey, I don't think this works, or I don't think we can do this, or whatever. And it becomes a conversation. But I was redoing the policies because I think you all updated the policies to be more compliant. And so that's another part of my job, by the way, is like not only just deciding what our policies are going to be, but actually finding out like what are the best practices today as it relates to like data protection, as it relates to security, as it relates to compliance, and working with lawyers to make sure I'm up to date on data protection law around the world, right? Like someone has to stay on top of all of that and then update and adapt internally according to those things.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And in terms of cost, to extent you're comfortable sharing, like what should folks budget for this dollar cost?
I think in terms of just like the actual like payments that we had to make for like the auditing and the tools and stuff like that, I think it was around $25,000, but that doesn't take into account like my time or anyone on my team's time.
Totally. It sounds like in a lot of ways, it's a larger cost. Like you had the 25,000. It was your time, your team's time. And with kind of that in mind, tips for others to make it less costly, maybe particularly in terms of time.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of leverage on the tools cost side of things. But yeah, I think to make things less time consuming, it goes back a little bit to what you said earlier, Christina, like start to do some of these things on your own, like get an understanding of what the requirements are going to be for something like this, even if you're doing it down the line, and start to, bake those into your practices. Because we were doing that, which is great. And as a result, we weren't trying to do, the spreadsheet from the auditor was, I think, like 100 rows, right? Thankfully, we were already doing like 85 to 95% of those things. So that if we weren't, like, that would have been very daunting.
Right. Like this whole other set of stuff. That makes sense. It sounds like, I know I'm extending a little bit, so please push on this, but like, because you all had such a, security baked in so early, culturally practice actually, that some of the later compliance pieces or proving your security were relatively easier than they could have been. So yeah, how do folks kind of bake security into their culture early?
It just has to actually be a priority. Like it can't be something you're just paying lip service to. It can't be like, we're going to do the bare minimum just to get this contract or whatever. Like it has to be like, we actually care about it. Here's what the best practices are for security. Here's what will be, like I said, reviewed down the line in something like a SOC 2. How do we start doing those things today? Like, I think one simple thing you could do is like very early on, we had to write an InfoSec policy. And so I asked at the time, our law firm, you all have templates now, which is great, but at the time I wasn't working with Vanta. So I asked our law firm for a template policy. And then I actually read the entire policy. And then I asked our engineer questions about the things in it that I didn't understand. And then I asked him if we were doing certain things that I did understand. And so that's a great first step, is if you get like a really high quality InfoSec policy and just go through point by point and see like, okay, are we doing these things? And not just delete something because you're not doing it, but really hold it up as aspirational and say like, okay, this is what I want to have accomplished by the end of the year. Can we get there?
Yep. Sort of a big guiding and a North Star for some of the team, as you mentioned, but like using best practices that way too.
Yeah. And then empowering people, like, our engineers sometimes would take longer to do things, but it's because we were thinking about how to do them in the most secure way, or giving them, let's say you have a product roadmap and you're trying to build new features, but you have to to balance that against the investment that you have to make in the security side. So he would say like, I need to take like, this was like our lead engineer. I need to take like 3 days to do this thing, but it will make us more secure. Great. Please go do that.
Right. Right. And that's, yes, gets your like cultural, like actually baked in, like you have this, decision. How do you spend the 3 days? Like, yep.
Yeah. And it doesn't ever feel great to like push off a new feature that you promised a customer for something that they're never going to see. Like it takes a lot of conviction, I think, but it pays for itself later. Like we've never had a data breach. We've never had a security incident. So, I mean, part of that is luck and all these other things, but I do think preparation is a big part of it.
Right. Right. The best way to be lucky more often is to be more prepared, or a more eloquent version of that, but that concept basically. Yeah. Neat. One, we're coming up on, I know, Q&A time, but one thing I'd love to touch on and spend some time on is how AllVoices, the product, not just the company, but like also fits into security and compliance processes.
Yeah. So one exciting thing I found out when doing all this research on SOC 2 certification is that there was a new requirement put in place for companies getting their SOC 2 certification, which is like any company that's handling customer data or sensitive data, which was you have to provide some type of reporting mechanism, ideally anonymous, for people to share feedback on privacy and security issues that they may have noticed. And it not necessarily just employees, but really anyone. That needs to be part of your practices in order to maintain SOC 2 compliance. And so we were excited by that because we have an ethics and compliance module within our tool. So employees can report fraud or anything that from an ethics and compliance perspective, and security concerns fit into that. So we also realized like we could provide AllVoices to companies as a part of their SOC 2 certification.
Neat. And have you started doing that?
Yeah, we have. So we have a partnership with Vanta. And so once they start to put in place, the systems and tools that they need to be compliant, and a reporting tool is one of them. And so some of them have come to us and said, hey, we want to learn more about your tool. And we have a very like minimal out of the box version of our product that's just to help people kind of check the box on this. But then also we've gone back to our customers who don't have that module enabled and said, hey, you probably have some type of certification. You should be aware that we have this. And we've been able to upsell them on the compliance piece and security piece. Yeah.
Very neat. And just one last question for you before you open it up to everyone, but I imagine there's a large cultural piece to a tool like yours, or like where we're kind of rolling it out and ensuring adoption in an organization. How do you recommend folks go about doing that? You've seen, a bunch of companies go forward with AllVoices.
Yeah. So I would say it's been like such an interesting time over the last few years, because I think, especially given what's happened with COVID and the labor market being what it is, I think companies are really trying to think bigger about how to take care of employees and how to keep them and keep them happy, and hire great employees and all of that. And I think one aspect of that is for employees to feel psychologically safe at work, for them to feel like they can speak up about things, that they won't be retaliated against. And of course, in an ideal, perfect organization, retaliation would never happen. Everyone's feedback would be taken into consideration and acted upon perfectly, but we know that's not the case. And so I think to bridge that gap and to bridge the trust gap that many employees have between kind of what they would like to share and what they actually feel comfortable sharing, it's really important to have different channels in place that enable them to speak up. And yeah, it might be someone raising their hand and saying, hey, we're taking shortcuts with our security and I've noticed it, and this could be really bad for our company down the line. And here's why. Or it might be my boss is making us stay at the office until midnight, or it might be someone on our team has COVID and We're all being asked to come into work anyway. So
Yeah.
there's a wide range of topics, but it's like, no matter what's going on, at a point in time in your company, you will have a pulse on what's happening if you provide a way for employees to share it with you.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, to your point, like anonymous and like can't be traced back to them, not worried about retaliation, but having those open channels of communication with employees so that they feel psychologically safe, as you say.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful. Okay. Ran a bit over, apologies. But S, maybe turn the microphone over to you for Q&A.
Yes, thank you all so much for that awesome fireside chat. I believe there's a lot of great information that our founders found very informative. And also to everyone attending, feel free, if any questions came up for you during their chat, feel free to put those questions in the chat here. But we did get great questions as well from our registration. So I'm going to start off with one, and it's asking, what is a security roadmap and how do you create one?
Yeah, maybe I can take a start and then again, Claire, I can talk to it from like actually a Vanta perspective. So maybe to start, okay, so broadly a security roadmap, I mean, sort of like a product roadmap. It is just, the prioritized lists of initiatives your team want to tackle with maybe timelines against them. Just for, security initiatives versus, product or new features. Probably a bit obvious. I think from a security perspective, one thing we've seen in companies do well to start with are things that, I don't know, can sound a little basic, but are actually tremendously impactful. So I mentioned this earlier, but things like, hey, getting a list of all of your current employees and making sure, they have two-factor on their email, they have two-factor on the other key tools they're using, to the extent it's possible, having them all sign into certain tools, like through, Google Sign-On or Okta or whatever you're using, just because it's easier to secure one thing than secure many. As just like one specific initiative. But I think, the term security roadmap can sound kind of large and intimidating, and I've never put one of those together. What are they? But kind of reductively, it's just kind of a list of the initiatives you want to tackle, and you can start with initiatives that, again, seem basic or seem small, and there's actually a ton of value in that. It does not have to be, advanced cryptography by any sense of the imagination. You definitely don't have to start there.
Thank you. You have a question for Claire. Looking back, is there something you wish you had done differently in your compliance journey?
Yes, I really wish I had gone through this process of getting SOC 2 certified sooner. I think I was kind of intimidated by the amount of work that it was going to be. But like I said, I've spent hundreds of hours on like just security reviews alone. And so having something like this in place, like I said, can kind of be that like stamp of approval to your customers. And so they may not have sent me such onerous security reviews to complete had I had some kind of formal certification. And what I realized through the certification is like the vast majority of those things we've been doing the whole time anyway. So why not get someone external to validate that and save me a lot of time?
Awesome. Another question we had was, do you have any recommended tech stack solutions for integrating consumer data in a secure way to backend portals and platforms?
Is this for me or Christina?
Either, both.
So we have like the tech stack that we use as a software company. So we use like HubSpot and just a lot of different like marketing tools. And it seems like from what I've noticed, like pretty much every company, at least like major companies, are thinking about how to build tools that integrate with one another. Like we just started using PandaDoc for proposals, and that integrates with HubSpot. And so I think like a lot of the best tools are already talking to each other. I'm not sure if that was the question that you were asking, but but and then we create obviously integrations for AllVoices with our customers' data. So we connect to their HRIS and we pull in relevant data for our customers to be able to kind of track and manage all employee relations issues in one place. So I think integrating with other tools is, of course, in a secure way is critical to, I think, being a tool in this era.
Yeah, very much agree with that. And I think, I don't know, two kind of things I'd add on is one, when you're choosing other tools like that your team is going to use that might have customer data, just doing your own due diligence on them. Right. And something Claire mentioned is like her team thought they're using Google Analytics, right? And they probably thought they're just using HubSpot and just that. I mean, whatever tools your team is using, just thinking through that, particularly because right, the kind of worry is if you put customers, say Vanta puts customer data in HubSpot and then HubSpot gets breached and Vanta customer data goes out the door, we still have to turn around and email our customers, right? Even though it wasn't our fault, like customers don't matter, right? We trusted HubSpot leaked on the internet, etc. So just like that chain of trust is very important. I think the second bit too, and this is like much more technical and sort of in the weeds, but just where you can and you're building your product, and again, Claire can talk to this much better, but just using common encryption, so using SSL, using encryption at rest, just kind of making sure that when you're sending data between different tools, you're doing so in a secure and encrypted way. When you're storing it somewhere, it is also encrypted, just within your own software development practices.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Excuse me. So another question is, how difficult is the security process like a SOC 2 when you have zero experience?
Well, I guess, okay, so going back to what I said before about how I wish I hadn't done hundreds of, or dozens, I guess, of security reviews, it did help me get familiar with all of these concepts and practices and even what the words mean and stuff like that. But I would say if you haven't gone through the security review process over and over and built that competency, just work closely with an engineer or someone on your team who really does understand security and is obviously dealing with it day to day, and kind of just talk through like, oh, what is TLS v1.2? Like what are these things? Because that's what I had to do along the way, and that's how I learned. But you could do it all at once, sitting down with someone who understands these things.
We have a live question for Claire from Julie, who says, it sounds like SOC 2 doesn't cover all the items in security review from the clients. If that's the case, do you see a lot of gaps as a SaaS company, or SOC 2 usually covers about like 80% of the security review items?
Yeah, I mean, it just varies so much company to company. Sometimes they'll say like, thanks for the SOC 2, and can we see like a copy of your latest penetration test and your InfoSec policy, and that's it. Sometimes they're like, okay, I'm so glad you have a SOC 2. Please answer these 50 questions as well. Some of those probably actually can be answered by referencing the SOC 2, but because of their practices, they don't want to be the one to go through your SOC 2 and copy paste things into that document or into that program. So it's kind of like you doing the grunt work for them in many cases, but you'll kind of do anything that you need to do to get a new customer. So you do it. So I think there's still a lot of opportunities for some automation in that space. And maybe Christina is going to be working on that next.
Yeah, we're excited by this. I think it does, to Claire's point, it totally depends who you're selling to. For some folks, it's like, oh, have a SOC 2, pass go, collect $200, like please proceed to procurement. And for some folks, it's just table stakes, right? It's like, we will not talk to you unless you have this. Okay, now we'll start the conversation. Now please jump through 57 hoops, right? Obviously, two ends of the spectrum, there's stuff in between, but just like varies widely. But yes, agree that the security questionnaires are no one's favorite.
I think that's all the questions we've had, unless anyone has any more live questions, put them in the chat. But if not, this is super helpful. And again, if you missed any parts of it, we will be sending a recording to everyone who registered for the event. So I want to thank Christina and Claire one more time. Thank you all for doing. Oh, we have another question. It says, how does SOC 2 relate to high trust and other security certifications? And this will be our last question.
Yeah, okay, so I can briefly take this. There's actually like kind of a whole alphabet soup of these certifications. They are generally or ostensibly separate, right? Like a SOC 2, has its own set of things, high trust has its own set, ISO, etc. So you have to go through kind of multiple audits and multiple processes. That said, there's a bunch of overlap between the things they ask for. In ballpark, it depends on a lot of things, but call it like 40 to 80%. So maybe the relationship is, these things kind of sit next to each other. If you do one, it gets easier to do more of them, but you still have to do incremental work each time.
Awesome. Again, okay. They confirmed that was very helpful.
Oh, great. Wonderful. One thing I want to say is just if anyone on the call is interested in Vanta, the obligatory plug, if you visit vanta.com/FFA, we'd love to both chat with you and 25% discount on software on whatever certification you're looking for.
Awesome. Thank you. And please take advantage of that discount, you all. So yes, now we can finally wrap up. Thank you again, Christina and Claire. This is super helpful. And we'll be sending this recording out to everyone so you can reference the information again, and feel free to connect with Vanta as well. They are awesome partners of ours. And so with that being said, thank you all